I never thought the day would come where I would be looking at a corpse. No amount of alcohol could get me through this. Blood drained from the back of Ericsson's neck. And if that was the only thing, this would be a normal murder scene by my father's book. It was the blood splatter across the frigid stone walls, the dark wood boxes, and clay-molded pots that tickled an uneasy emotion through me. My name is Brian Miller, and my role in Dolumia was to shepherd wrongdoers and investigate any nefarious activities for our leader, Ben Sawyer. Somebody killed Erickson, which was a shock in itself. But if there was one good thing that came out of this, it would be that Erickson was free of this place, this life. Even though this was my job, that didn't mean I wanted to see stuff like this. And it was a blessing that I never saw things like this up until now. But things have changed. "Hey, Miller!" Sawyer's voice boomed through the arid walls and echoed a fierce power through me like it did his parishioners. I turned around and looked at Sawyer, the leader of Dolumia. A stalwart man known for his strong leadership, but his sweeter tongue. "Miller, what can you tell me? What happened?" Sawyer asked. It was rare to see Sawyer shaken, so I must admit, I was more scared than he was. I rocked my head. "It's exactly what it looks like, but I haven't figured out anything yet." "Well, you better figure out something, Miller. This is the first time anyone has been murdered in over 32 years. Everybody's pulling me left, right, and center about it. It's crazy." I knew that all too well. "Well, all I can say is I'm ill-prepared for this as much as you are right now." Sawyer's eyes speared through me and he frowned. "Then we need to be prepared. Everybody's scared right now. I had to end my evening prayer early. Everything's a mess. So, Miller, I'm asking you, can you figure out what happened?" "Don't worry, Sawyer. I won't fail you. Just give me time over here. I just came out of the pantry. I'm still looking at everything. Whoever did this is not going anywhere. There's no way to run anyways." Sawyer shook his head and bit his fingernail. "Yeah, you're right. I'll lock down the tunnels to make sure nobody's leaving this town. I'll give you 2 days from now. After that, life has to go on." There weren't as many towns as there were holes in the earth, because that's what they were living in, under the earth. "All right. If anything, I'll report back to you." Sawyer opened his mouth, but decided against it, nodded his head, and walked back to the center of the town. I got back to work in this tight little enclave Erickson had here. Erickson was one of the more obscure residents of Dolumia, but he had an important role. He was a watcher, and his role was to go to the surface. And so he was the only person given the privilege to watch over the surface world, to check the upper crust of Earth for radiation levels, and to gather materials for use. Anything he gathered would be cleaned of radiation to make sure that he didn't endanger anyone below. People like Erickson were usually popular, at least back in my father's days. In these times, people like Erickson were either considered poison or distrusted. I wonder what poison was worse. The radiation of the nuclear fallout that devastated the Earth 76 years ago, or the imaginative minds of people in the deep caverns of various interconnected underground towns that held the last of civilization. The place of Erickson's death was unremarkable. It was nothing more than a storage inlet that they built here. Something about him dying here didn't settle well with me. From what I could see, it didn't seem like he fought back. I unzipped my bag and dusted off a collection kit of tools for homicides, something I never thought I would use. The only injuries were around the neck and parts of the right hand. The neck was likely where the killing blow was administered. Huge lacerations carved from the side to the top. On one of the hands were brutal-looking bruises. Was that caused by him trying to block an attack? The murder weapon of choice was a blood-soaked cleaver knife. On it was a pattern that indicated the owner, the meat butcher of Dolumia. I photographed the body and collected some blood. My canvas throughout the community was not much better. The houses were carved into the wall, yet the people's voices couldn't be heard from the depths within. Most people didn't talk to Erickson, so of course, I didn't find out much about anything. I still expected to get some gossip though. We were a town under the earth, with a few tunnels leading to other towns, some of them less terrible than others. But everybody was close-knit, so secrets were hard to keep, and if they were, it was usually out of respect for someone. Erickson was dead, so he was free game. I got nothing from the residents, much to my disappointment. The meat butcher was a dead end as well. He told me that the cleaver knife was stolen. He reported it to me a year ago, which was embarrassing for me that I forgot that much, and it wasn't like larceny was common. Dolumia was one of the more prosperous towns. People from other towns wanted to come here. Not that Sawyer would allow them. Resources were few, and even though we had our own underground farms, covering a quarter-mile of land, using a mix of aeroponics and greenhouse pits, food and energy usage was tightly regulated. I walked into the restricted sections of Dolumia and past the large 50-foot transformers of the substations, carrying the transferred heat energy of the neighboring magma to its residents. My analysis of Erickson's office once I reached there was uninspiring, to say the least. Clean and organized, but there were a lot of books and papers stacked in a neat bunch. They were labeled with ink paint on reusable brown paper that was constantly remade by the recycling department. I could assume the recycling department didn't like him, with only 2 days given to me. There was no way I was going to go through all of that, so I checked for anything on the surface that seemed out of place. I hated coming to Sawyer without good news, for he never liked anything except results. He was a tough leader, just like his father, but it was the only reason why Dolumia was still standing. There are many underground towns built by the military secretly in case an apocalypse came knocking. Sadly, many of those towns are gone now. A lot of them devolve into tyranny, mindless violence, or debauchery. Over 15,000 humans went underground on that fateful day many decades ago, but only around 700 of us were left. So as much people had their complaints about Sawyer, we gave him his praise, for he kept us safe. The shadows of the overarching stone gateway passed over me as I got closer to the Temple of Agon. Those arches curved into the crude rock that was sprinkled with drawings of animals, once hunted by our ancestors. My breath hitched as it got hotter, and my nose twitched to the perfumed air. People in loose overalls were replaced with dark-colored robes, rolling over their now hidden forms. They mourned their dead ones and wished for future prosperity in hushed prayers. Some were probably praying for safety. A murder occurred, and the perpetrator had not been caught. People were going to look over their shoulders for a while, and I had to do the same as well. I stepped out of the confusing shadows and soon got bathed in the bright midst of the temple's might. Sawyer traveled without hindrance as he stood over his servants.
People, hear me. Do you feel this energy? We are the blessed ones. We survived. And do you know what that means? You are the chosen ones. You survive because God has chosen you to survive, to continue on this earth. You are the ones that will save this earth. And it's only a matter of time for all of you, for all of us.
The crowd cheered back their scattered affirmations and praises. It was nothing more than a circular room of the cave, with flickering fires burning the wood into oblivion. But in one corner of that room was a large rising precipice of rock, reddened by narrow ravines of bubbling magma flowing underneath it, and crystals deposited along its edge. A large human-like statue sat on that precipice, crafted by our hands, with a rising path leading to the tunnel in its chest. This was the image of Agon, and he sat quite comfortably, high and mighty, staring down upon his servants. And his servants were many. As the scattered crowd moved in reverence and caution under his perceived sight, Agon was the god they served. He spread like wildfire throughout the confines of our new home, and soon took over the lives of many people here. All other gods and religions were forgotten, and I had to be an inquisitor. I would question people's loyalty and faith in the religion and Sawyer's leadership. It's not something I wanted to do, and I'm not too proud of it, but according to Sawyer, it had to be done. The moment people had a choice, they would destroy the peace of others. At least that's what he said. But I never saw the other side, so I couldn't speak to that. It annoyed me, for I needed some sleep. Sawyer came to me as I ascended the rock. "What have you found, Miller? Did you find a killer?" I exhaled in frustration. "I found nothing much to speak on. I talked to the people that knew him. He was more reclusive during his last months, and his family mirrored that sentiment. The butcher's knife that was found was stolen, so it can't be the butcher. I still have to find the thief of that knife, but outside of that, nothing." Sawyer said, "What if the butcher just reported it, but he was lying?" "Possible, but he has no motive. He chops meat and Erickson is a recluse. There's no connection." Sawyer groaned aloud. Makes sense." I cleared my throat. "Regarding Erickson, according to the guards at the portal, he was exiting out of the town a lot. Like, a lot more." Sawyer said under his breath, "I know." My eyes widened. "You gave him permission to?" "I'm not familiar with his job, but I assume it would only be a limited amount of times he would be able to exit out of the town, right?" Sawyer looked at me as if I said something stupid and replied, "There's no limit. He goes out, he gets what I ask him to get, and he brings it to me. That's what he's supposed to do. But he's never been one to want to go out there. And, if I can be frank, he didn't even want the duty. But he's the only one with the knowledge to do it. So, he had to." That was normal. There were very few humans left, so skills were taught from parents to children. It was the same for Sawyer and me. Sawyer's father was the leader before him, and my father was just like me. The law of Dolumia. There had been 3 leaders of Dolumia, and our fathers overthrew the first one, making Ben Sawyer's father the second leader, with my father being his right hand. Even decades between our families, nothing much had changed, with Sawyer being the leader and me being his right hand. But that also brought up an interesting problem. I asked, "He had no child. Who's going to be the next in line?" Sawyer stared at me. "I don't know yet, and it's important that we get somebody. Somebody that we can trust." "Yes, I'm sure you'll figure it out." "I already have. The person is standing right in front of me." I finally looked within those eyes, and terror ripped through me like a wild beast at the prospect.
What? No, I was never trained for that.
You can be trained, and you know me, Miller. I trust you. I already knew that, but that was not the problem. In the role I had, I was respected, and though things were slow at times, there could be fun with the usual fight in the bars and frolics after one of Agon's numerous mandatory festivals. No one liked Erickson or anyone that did that role. To go outside is to go into the hands of the devil, as far as these people were concerned. Everybody was going to scorn me. So I said,
I appreciate that, don't get me wrong. I respect the offer, but I don't want to do this.
It took a lot out of me to even say that much, but I knew Sawyer. He was not a fan of the word no. Sawyer stepped closer. I hesitated as his hand patted my shoulder before his fingers gripped, his nails piercing my skin. You're going to do this for me, Miller. My lips twitched in an urge to open, but it was as if the force of gravity locked them shut. Sawyer smiled and turned his head. Just do it, okay? I trust you. You get that? Just like my father trusted your father. My mind whirled in contempt at this new development. I hated this, but it wasn't like I had much of a choice. But where I lacked choice, I had leverage. He trusted me after all.
All right, I'll do it. But here's the deal. I want a gallon of beer per week, some extra food rations, and I can choose to come into Sunday Mass. I think that's fair, considering I'm risking my life to do this extra duty that you're giving me.
Sawyer and I were smiling at each other, but I could feel the raging emotion he was hiding behind that smile.
Okay, got it. Follow me,
he said. Sawyer led me up the stairwell and into the heart of Agon. It was the first time I ever entered this part of Dolumia. Only Sawyer's priests and chosen ones ever followed Sawyer into the heart of their god. I guess I felt special somehow. We came into a deep incline, and a large room presented itself with painted banners of our ancestors in grand exploits such as battles and festivities. It was quieter than it was outside. The men walking around here were in deeper reverence, and their faces showed no fear. We were surrounded by candles glowing in hollow holes. We both stepped onto the platform, holding an eloquently dressed table with its burning incense and its rows of knives along the edge. Sawyer opened up a door at the back of the platform, and we went down a narrow hall. The priests followed. The further down we went, the more unnerving sounds I heard. It was a mix of rubber against the wet glass, with intermittent knocking sounds like some bad drum solo. The skin off my back crawled with a sensation. I walked into a frightening place. Cages were all over the room, but it was the things inside, those pseudo-plastic cages, that shook my bones down to the marrow. I glanced around and saw beasts of magnificent size. It could be reasoned these beasts were around 8 feet tall. I shuddered from the overpowering might of the beast's size. Its brown, rubbery skin slumped and rolled off the prominent bones around its neck. Those eyes were big, but its claws were bigger, within an ugly metal glove wrapping around it. As shocked as I was, stone frozen in fright, my mind was in overdrive. What was this thing? Why was it here? What is this place, really? All these questions rebounded in my head. When I found my voice, it could not be contained within the temple.
What the hell is this?
My yell reverberated throughout the monsters and made them more feral, for they screamed out in solidarity with me. It was nauseating, hearing their contempt for us. Sawyer turned to me with a somber expression.
What do you think?
I was scared stiff, and my legs were wobbling, but I couldn't tell him that. Instead, I asked, What evil work are you doing here? Sawyer pointed at the creatures. Those creatures have a city 10 miles away from here. Erickson was collecting their eggs. We would breed them here. The question that formed in my mind was how much of a problem Sawyer had with that. He said Erickson didn't want the job. I was sure about one thing right now. I didn't want the job either. A city? I asked. Sawyer gave me the lowdown, and it was a terrifying one. Those creatures weren't just animals from our past or mutated cretins. They were aliens. Erickson documented seeing their spaceships and the habitations they had set up on Earth, of which there were many. A lot of the cities were interconnected and clustered around each other, but were usually built near rivers and hilly areas. These aliens were named Farloggers, but it wasn't Erickson who named them. It was another person, and that was 50 years ago. These aliens have been around for a long time, and it was a secret held tight to the chest by the leaders of each town, or what was left of them. A lot of those towns were devoured by armed Farloggers. Dolumia was safe, for it was far away from most Farlogger cities. Sawyer seemed self-impressed with himself when he was talking about them, but my emotions were not calm. The breeding of them here was for our defense. Sawyer and the other leaders wanted to find the weaknesses in the Farloggers' makeup. So, they were only here for experiments and analysis. I looked at them making their low cries at us. The timbre of their cries made their violent bashes against the walls more unsettling. They wanted no friendship, that's for sure. All their eyes communicated to me was my eventual death. Did my father know about this? No. If he knew, I would have known. My father taught me everything I needed to learn, so learning about this now, after all these years, made the working relationship between Sawyer and I seem ungenuine. I spoke. You kept this? You and all your friends in your pretty little club kept this a secret and I wasn't told about this? Well, welcome to the club. You know now. Sawyer's hand waved in a reassuring gesture, like he was unfazed by my concerns. Even though you're not going to admit it to me, Brian Miller. I know you don't believe in our God. You pretend to pray when you close your eyes, but I can see it in your face. You don't want to be here every Sunday. It's only a formality for you. You believe in the truth, the facts you can see right in front of your face. I swallowed and held my tongue, but my eyes flicked around at his cloaked priests, standing proud in their deeds with Sawyer. I know you're not an idiot, Mr. Miller. Being complimented by Sawyer was a rare occurrence, and I should have been proud, but it carried a mocking tone, as if I should know better about my place. Sawyer continued. You can go outside and take a look for yourself, but you can look at them right now. Does that to you look like an opponent we can defeat? The sad reality of spending decades under the earth is that we've had to limit our progress. We had to sacrifice our land, civilization, the things that gave us our weapons, our power. The same power and weapons that we use to destroy ourselves are gone. We left them up there, on that ruined land, and settled down to a simpler life within the core of this planet. Our forefathers all had dreams of eventually returning to the surface and taking back what was theirs, but they were naive. The Farloggers destroyed them. My father and the smarter leaders made sure we stayed underground. If they don't know we're here, we can never die. I shook my migraine-infested head. What are you saying to me? It's over? The Earth is theirs now? Sawyer shook his head. It was never ours to begin with. It belonged to Agon, and we spat on his gift to us. It was taken away from us, and now He has given it to a new set of servants that will probably do better. As much as I was no servant of their god, so it didn't matter. I knew deep down he was right. What could we do? Nothing, really. We've been here for so long, and we were still here, but we left the Earth's surface unoccupied. It was easy pickings, and we did not have the manpower, much less firepower, to take it back. No matter how much I didn't like it, this was going to have to be our home now. I exhaled my frustration. So what do you expect me to do now? Watch. That's all you can do. It was a simple instruction, but something was nagging at me. Erickson's death, what would become a forgotten topic, brokered renewed interest in my mind. Sawyer walked off, but he only made it a few steps before stopping and turning around to smile. Oh, and one more thing, Brian. When you go to the surface, don't go too far out there. You hear? Sawyer said. My tongue struggled to form the words, so I nodded my head in response. Learning the job wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. It was similar to the safety precautions when I passed the magnetic shield to enter the infirmary, only multiplied by 10. The rules were tighter, of course, and unlike my first job where I was dealing with humans, I was dealing with nature. The first day I stepped outside in the protective suit afforded to me, there was a sense of calm that came with knowing that I was on the surface of our planet. A place we once ruled. It was a place we ran from and couldn't go back to for fear of its dangers. Once Sawyer sent me out to their city on a collection raid, I got my chance to see what the city was like. I've only heard of the cities our ancestors used to build, but this was ridiculous. The Farlogger's city was so vast, it was like they weren't strangers to our planet. The pristine walls reached the heavens. Buildings were composed of round blocks, stacked upon each other. The glittering lights from the roots to the peaks gave it a fascinating shine over the darker shadows gripping the inner layers of the cityscape. My eyes were dazzled by the thousands of flying vehicles traveling over their city. Stealing the eggs was not easy, for the Farloggers became privy to us stealing their eggs. Ericsson's notes helped inform me, so I was prepared. I was able to get one, but I didn't walk away unscathed. My ankle was sprained from running through the deep ravines Ericsson illustrated in his notes. On my way back, I couldn't help but feel like a nuisance, like one of those other animals within the woods. Was that how they looked at me? Outside of those raids, it was a relatively boring job, and it took up a lot of my workload, so many months passed. Ericsson didn't become a fading memory to me, and even in the quietest of whispers within Dolumia, everybody was asking who they could trust. I went about my duties, keeping rule breakers in line and watching the surrounding land above Dolumia. Ericsson's office became my refuge. His stacked notes and reports were an interesting subject matter for me. He kept a history of everything, and these documents were more of a diary rather than flat reports. When a person has time, I guess they could write all day, but these ramblings weren't about the Farloggers. It was about Sawyer. Ericsson kept track of Sawyer's experiments and his actions. Sawyer wasn't honest with me as I thought. According to Ericsson, those creatures were being bred for combat. Sawyer invested a lot of effort in trying to find ways to control them. This bastard lied to me. It was obvious he didn't want anyone to find out that part, and Ericsson knew. It became clear to me who killed Ericsson and why I was chosen to be the Watcher. What I needed right now was proof, or at least an honest answer. He did trust me after all. I came to Sawyer and asked, "I want to speak to you, alone." Sawyer snapped his finger and the priest cleared the room. He motioned for me to sit, but I wasn't in the mood for that. This wasn't going to be a comfortable discussion anyway. I asked, "Why did you kill Erickson?" Sawyer's eyes shifted away from me and onto the roof. He loved being outside too much. He forgot his loyalty to us. "Loved?" I said in a hoarse whisper. We feared he was going to reveal the secret, so we had to take him out. "And then you framed the butcher?" Sawyer got up and went over to the offering table. "We framed him. Help me out here, Brian. We have to protect the rest of the residents of Dolumia." "From what?" I asked. Sawyer touched one of the knives. "Their selves. We as humans must be controlled, lest we destroy ourselves," I replied. "We? No. This is all about you gaining more control." "You're right." He went around the table with his hands clasped behind his back, but my heart pounded when my gaze settled on the knives. "And with that control, I kept all of you safe. Your father did that, and now you're disrupting that peace." Sawyer stopped moving. "You don't understand. If I get eternal peace, I'll disrupt it for even a second." He pulled a knife, but I pulled my gun, and he froze when I pointed at him. "Put it down." Sawyer's hand opened, and the knife clattered against the ground. He swiftly turned on his heel and ran into the back. I chased him and lost him in the darkness, but where my sight failed, my ears did not. A long beeping sound echoed. The resounding clanks of the cages shook my constitution, but my fingers gripped my gun tighter and my legs urged me forward with each step. What light was afforded to me showed their morphing figures flying across the room, but they never looked at me. Sawyer bellowed as they ripped into him with furious swipes of their claws. They had caught him before he ran away and laid their judgment upon him. Lights burned over me as they came on. It was a sickening sight. Sawyer choked as blood rippled up from his twitching lips. He was dead, but I was the last living human in this room. The Farloggers turned around and glared at me. Every bone in my body screamed for me to run, but I was frozen. My eyes glanced around to see Farloggers sneaking up behind me. I was surrounded. Sweat came down my face as I contemplated my next options, but my chest collapsed into an uncontrollable despair. I inhaled. Dying here was not an option.
"Sawyer!"
One of the priests called. The Farloggers behind me immediately rushed at priest, attacking him, and that was my chance. Spinning on my toes, I jumped into a sprint toward the exit. My knee caught something, and I tumbled through the exit. Rolling to a painful stop, I groaned in annoyance, but remembered my resolve, so I threw myself up to shut the door. Thuds and raucous bellows followed the shutting of the door. Even if it was made of thick metal, hearing their maddening distress to escape was enough to send my stomach into the pits. I hated to admit it, but Sawyer was right. We had to hide under the earth, but he just wasn't the leader to carry us into that future. My back was stretched when I got up, and his priests were glaring at me like I had been unfaithful with their wives. I passed their ugly mugs and knew if they dared touch me, I would shoot them. The Farloggers' cries echoed throughout the cavern, and when I stepped out, it was to the silence of Sawyer's flock. The whole town. All of them stared up at me, their eyes glowing through me, deeper than the razor. Whether they believed my explanation didn't matter to me. I just wanted to drink a beer. Then we could talk about why their home wasn't their salvation, but their punishment. Hey sci-fi horror fans, it's Kian. Thanks for listening tonight. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to leave a thumbs up and a comment below. And if you'd like to further support us, you can sign up for a membership over here on YouTube or on our Patreon. And remember, stay cosmic.